Now, I'm very proud and honored to introduce my dear friend and colleague, the most eminent and respected shaman and super shaman of today, Dr. Alberto Villoldo, who has learned who himself grew a new body. Oh, he has degrees in anthropology and in medicine and all sorts of things, and psychiatry in a Western sense. And then he made a great leap of faith in his life and went into the Amazon and became a graduate of the jungle school of shamanic vision quest and self-transformation. And he grew a new body from the gift of Mother Nature and Mother Earth in the tradition of the great Andean and Amazonian shamans, and the tradition of the serpent and the panther and the hummingbird and the condor, the eagle condor. And since then has become a best-selling, well-known, globally helpful teacher of helping people lost and alienated in the industrial alienation from the life base, Mother Earth, and the elements, earth, water, fire, wind, space, 5 elements, and helping them interconnect, healing them, and teaching us all. And I feel his benefit, and I'm sure you will feel his benefit. So, Dr. Master Shaman Alberto Villoldo.
We are luminous, undying beings on a journey through infinity. The shamans in the high Andes, when they do prayer ceremonies, they will use 2 threads, a silver thread and a red thread. And the red thread represents our journey through the earth. This is the red path, the way that we all travel through the earth and through our biological existence, our journey on the mother. The silver thread represents our journey through the stars. We're not only traveling to the earth, we're also traveling through the stars. And this is the great journey that the shamans prepare for. The goal of all of the shamanic teachings is to learn how to leave this life alive, to bring our consciousness with us. We are assured of infinity. That's the nature of everything in the cosmos. Energy changes from one form to another, and so do we. But the task today is to become awake, is to understand the scope of our journey and to participate in it consciously. In this course, you're going to learn the strategies of the ancient Tibetans with Dr. Robert Thurman. Bob is a dear old friend. We've collaborated many times in the past. And you will also learn the models and the maps of the Andean shamans. These are the 2 most exquisite mappers of consciousness. The Tibetans and the Native Americans turned their vision inwards rather than studying the rotation of the planets and gravity and quantum mechanics. They used the mind to study the mind and discover the gateways to infinity. And in this course, you'll learn the maps that were crafted by these ancient map makers. They were studying the journey beyond death and our journey through the Milky Way and through the stars and how we continue to evolve consciousness from lifetime to lifetime. Now, in our particular journey through Earth School, and Earth is a school for us humans and for all creatures in it, we need to understand that death is simply a doorway. In fact, when a shaman does the death rites on a patient or on a loved one, the most difficult thing is to get them to understand that they've died. Because once the spirit is set free from the body, and once it wakes up into its spirit nature, into its luminous body, which is the body that will continue your journey until you are born again, the hardest thing is for them to understand that they're no longer in the physical body. And for the shamans that are able to see and to engage directly the spirits, you're saying to this person, but you've already died. And they're saying, what do you mean I've died? I'm completely alive. I'm conscious. I can see you. You can see me. We're talking to each other. What do you mean I'm dead? So this is the convincing them that they are at the start of another journey, of another chapter in which they're not burdened by their physical body, by the ailments, by the aches, by the pain, by the deterioration that you go through as you grow older, but that they're free, that they can envision themselves any age that they want. There's no pain, there's no suffering in the luminous body. And they're not burdened by their dog or their house or their car or their debt or their family history or even their name. You cannot even take your name with you for this next leg of the journey. And how do you step into this next chapter of your life consciously? This is the great task, not only in crossing the tremendous divide that separates biology from our luminous nature. That's a really important point. The Tibetans were masters at this. They developed the Bardo Todol, the Book of Liberation, which Bob Thurman has beautifully translated into English, and he'll be sharing with us the steps to making this great crossing elegantly and consciously. How do you avoid getting caught in the bardos? I remember years ago a patient of mine who was born in London and lived there during the Second World War. And in London, you would, once the air raid sirens went off, you had to go into an underground shelter. And she was 7 or 8 years old, very loving, very compassionate, playing with her friends. The air raid sirens went off, and she couldn't find her way back to her house. So soldiers took her to an anti-aircraft battery. So these were big guns that were shooting down the Nazi airplanes that were coming in to bomb London. And she could see the tracer bullets, she could smell the gunpowder, and one of the airplanes was hit. And it blew up, burst into flames, and it came crashing down towards the earth. And she was convinced that she saw the face of this young, beautiful German aviator who was dying inside this airplane, that she could see his face through the windscreen. Of course, that doesn't happen, but she was sure that she could see this young man who crashed, blew up, died. And she was so loving that the spirit of this young man became attached to her. And for 50 years, she carried this young man with her. And it wasn't until I was able to work with her and help this young pilot go back home, because he was caught in a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. He was trapped in one of the bardos of Buddhism. He couldn't wake up from this nightmare. He was still in this, crashing in this airplane and attached to a young woman who had a similar story to his, because he was never going to go back to his mother. And this young woman believed that maybe she would never find her mother again either. They shared the same story. And this happens, of course, to us while we're living as well. We're attracted to people that share the same story that we have. When I worked with her, I helped this young man go back to his mother, go back to the spirit world, to wake up from this nightmare that he had been trapped in. The Tibetans, of course, are masters at working with the spaces in between, with the in-betweens that they call it. And they described at the bardos the in-betweens. There's 6 of them, including this waking bardo that we're living in today. The shamans, of course, were also masters at making these great transitions on the journey beyond death. They were interested in what happened beyond the between places, beyond the tests and tribulations, beyond the challenges, beyond the waking up as a luminous being without having the containment of a biological body. And they wanted to know what lay ahead. What were the maps? Yes, we had to get through the test and the trials and the bardos and not get stuck and not get attached in one of the lower levels of the astral planes. But where do you go on your journey once you have passed these tests? What's available for you? What are the great schools, the universities, the wisdom centers that you could go and sit around a sacred fire and meet with the great, great teachers, with the shamans, the medicine keepers of time past and time future? Because the shamans in the Americas understood that once you left this physical realm, that time went by differently. That 1,000 years of earth time could go by in an instant in the spirit world. In fact, that you were stepping outside the river of time and into timelessness, into infinity. So these were the great curiosities of the shamans. And they discovered these maps by traveling through them, by journeying beyond the beyond. And they discovered that, yes, you could go to wisdom centers to sit at the feet of great masters and to absorb the wisdom intuitively, telepathically, directly, without even having a need for words. And when they did so, when they returned back to Earth School, they came back with a body of wisdom that made them illumined, that allowed them to experience life as a series of opportunities for learning, and not as a journeying of suffering and of terrible challenges that left you devastated. You could have a wisdom journey through your life here on earth in your next incarnation. Oh, imagine if we had known this 30 years ago. Then instead of having to learn through suffering and heartbreak and disappointment and deceit and lies, that we could learn directly from wisdom. Extraordinary. So these are the skills, of course, for not only making that transition beyond death and into infinity, but for bringing those gifts back into our lifetime today. The understanding that death is but a threshold that you cross, that on the other side of life, there's only life. Now, we've read about this. We know about this. We've read about it in all of the great traditions of the world. But the task is, how do we prepare while we're healthy, while we're youthful, while we're strong? What's our daily practice to train us to take this journey beyond death consciously, so that we don't have to be asking for directions at the very end of our lives? Not a very good time to be asking for directions. You want to know the way back home, back to the world of spirit now. I'm so thrilled to be working with my good friend Bob. He is the preeminent Buddhist scholar in the world, Professor Emeritus at Columbia University, dear friend of the Dalai Lamas. In fact, he was ordained as a monk by the Dalai Lama, the very first Westerner to be ordained as a Tibetan monk. Then he went, of course, the lay monk way, became married and had children. And he is the head of Tibet House in New York, and of Mendla, the great Buddhist study retreat center in New York. and an eminent scholar. It's such a treat to work with him. And he has the experience. He trekked the Himalayas. He walked to Lhasa. He has been in through Tibet. He did not read about Buddhism. He wrote the books about Tibetan Buddhism. It's such a treat to be sharing this course with him. I'm learning so much, tremendous amount. My work, of course, has been in the Americas, and with the shamans in the Americas that never had a body of writing. They never left any writing. They knew writing, they just didn't think it was that important. They had an oral tradition. So unlike the Buddhists that have these extraordinary texts, their wisdom has been translated into writing and into text to refer to. That's amazing. And in the Americas, we never had that. But in the Americas, the shamans were convinced that whatever you put to writing lost its spirit. So they transmitted the wisdom orally, and they understood that what was transmitted orally was the codes, were the passwords to gain access to these password-protected hard disk drives of the universe where you would learn directly from knowledge. Amazing conception. And one of the great teachings, of course, was the wisdom of the journey into infinity. Because this was the particular learning that we had to do here on earth. We had to become infinite beings. We had to break free of that identification with our temporal bodies that were born and died, and discover that part of ourselves that was unborn and undying, who we were before we were born and who we will be after we leave this body and this name behind. Who were you before you were born? Who will you be after you die? Does our journey end when we lose our physical body and our house and our dog and our name? Or does it continue? These were the questions that have plagued humanity, have haunted us for millennia. The Tibetans and the sages of the Americas, the shamans, discovered the maps to the journey beyond death to infinity. They were consummate map makers. At the same time that the cartographers in Europe were mapping the geography of the earth, the shamans and the Tibetan lamas were mapping the journey into the beyond, into infinity. We want to share these maps with you today. My friend Bob Thurman, eminent Buddhist scholar, the very first Westerner to be ordained as a Tibetan Lama by the Dalai Lama himself. He and I will be sharing with you the shamans' maps and the lamas' maps to infinity, and how you can craft a journey that extends way beyond this limited lifespan that we have today. This is the great journey that we're all taking. And the shamans say that the purpose of our acquiring the wisdom that we're acquiring is to learn how to get out of this life alive. We want to share with you the techniques that you can use to prepare for that great journey while you're still alive, and the maps that will allow you to enter infinity and in the Buddha realms where you can learn directly from wisdom and not through suffering any longer. Come and join us in this extraordinary adventure into infinity, in the meeting of the wisdom of Tibet and the wisdom of the ancient sages of the Americas. Discover who you were in your previous lifetimes and who you might become in your future lives.